Well, if anyone were to come over to our house down in Rockland, which they shouldn't, at least for now, because of all the social distancing that we're doing, right? At least I hope we all are. But if someone were to walk in and look at the TV that I'm watching a bit too much of these days, they might notice something interesting. Across the bottom 2 inches of the screen, there is a strip of brown wrapping paper that is held on with blue painter's tape. Covers up the entire bottom 2 inches of the TV screen, and it's there because I put it there. It all started, around a month ago, I think, is when it all started to hit. Back when all of the live sporting events shut down, including the PGA Golf Tour, which I've always enjoyed watching on a Saturday and Sunday afternoon. And then the PGA and other kinds of sports started doing something that I thought was very, very creative. They started to rebroadcast classic tournaments and games from the past, sports reruns, if you will. They would pick good tournaments, some of the best games that have been out there, and they rebroadcast them. I think it's a great idea. I think it's good for sports fans. I think it's good for their business too. So this one Saturday afternoon, very early on in this distancing thing, I decided to tune into a golf tournament from a few years back, just to sort of distract myself, right, from all of the COVID-19 news that was out there. Poured myself a nice adult beverage, and I kicked back in my favorite spot. The golf tournament was on, and there was this 4-way battle for first place. Beautiful green golf course, nice scenery, and just as I'm starting to relax, what do I see but this band of text at the bottom of the screen with the latest pandemic news. Now, I don't recall exactly what it said, but it was something like, unnamed source says death toll is going to be much higher than expected for reasons which are unclear. That, in other words, speculative stuff that I certainly didn't ask for, and I definitely didn't want to see as I tried to relax and experience at least some illusion of normalcy. And then it would go away, and it would pop up again 5 minutes later with the very same stuff. So, at that point, I recalled the immortal words of Howard Beale in the movie Network. Remember that? I just noticed this was on yesterday again. I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore. That's right, I'm not going to take it anymore. So, a roll of wrapping paper, some scissors, and painter's tape, problem solved. And I guarantee that after 5 minutes, you don't even notice that it's there, and it doesn't get in the way of anything that you want or need to see. In fact, Karen walked in at one point and sat down. I asked if she noticed anything different in the room. It took her about 5 minutes before she finally saw what I had done. Now, don't get me wrong. I want to be informed. But by golly, it's going to be on my terms and from the sources that I seek out and when I choose to seek it out, not being crammed down my throat, treating me like I'm some sort of a passive consumer of this stuff. And they wonder why we have a declining attention span, right? They're constantly trying to split your attention here and there. You cannot possibly have continuous breaking news, and yet they breathlessly report the same thing over and over and over again. We get to control the gateway to our own consciousness, so why would we ever want to give that power away? Well, it has something to do with evolution, natural selection. It seems like we've evolved to be, shall we say, naturally pessimistic, and there's an entire book devoted to this topic called Factfulness, 10 Reasons Why We're Wrong About the World and Why Things Are Better Than You Think. It was written by Hans Rosling. You might recall him from a video that we've shown a few times around here. The video that was called, what was it called? 200 Years, 200 Countries in 4 minutes. And there he is doing his thing with statistics. The reason he wrote this book is because he discovered that people living in relatively wealthy and educated countries like Sweden and the US were consistently wrong about the state of the world. He would ask people a series of questions about the state of the world, and he would give them three possible answers, A, B, and C, multiple choice, three answers, A, B, and C. And what he found was that people were far more pessimistic about things like the number of natural disasters, extreme poverty, education levels for women. They were so wrong that they could have scored better by just choosing random answers. He even did this little thought experiment about what might happen if he posed the same questions to chimpanzees at the local zoo. He said, imagine I decide to head down to the zoo to test out my questions on the chimpanzees. Imagine I take with me huge armfuls of bananas, each marked either A, B, or C, and throw them into the chimpanzee enclosure. Then I stand outside the enclosure, read out each question in a loud, clear voice, and note down as each chimpanzee's answer the letter on the banana that she next chooses to eat. If I did this, and I would never actually do this, but just imagine, if I did this, the chimps, by picking randomly, would do consistently better than the well-educated but deluded human beings who take my tests. Wow. Yeah, so there you go. There you go. He said it probably had something to do with the fact that chimps don't watch TV news. But whatever the reason, it's clear that we have some preconceived notions about the world that are very often contrary to the numbers, contrary to reality, contrary to the facts. And he says it turns out that the world, for all its imperfections, is in a much better state than we might think. That doesn't mean there aren't real concerns. But when we worry about everything all the time instead of embracing a worldview based on facts, we can lose our ability to focus on the things that threaten us most. In other words, we don't know what we don't know. And this is where some self-awareness can really help. And that's what we're trying to accomplish this morning. Unearthing and looking at some of our biases and the biases and those of the people around us. You know, and it's easy. It is so easy to blame a sensationalistic media. We can scapegoat them. I've found myself doing that several times. Blame the media. They only want to give us bad news. They're trying to program us. And it's easy to become frustrated and even cynical about the perceived lack of good news in the news. Part of the problem is the simple fact that it's not the nature of the news to cover things that did, it's the nature of the news to cover the stuff that did happen, not the things that did not happen. That's kind of hard to say. Part of the problem is that it's the nature of the news to cover the things that did happen rather than things that did not happen. They don't report on the country that's been at peace for 50 years. They report from the place where the Civil War just broke out. Bad things happen quickly, usually in sync with the news cycle. And you got to have something new, got to have something splashy every, 12 hours or so. Good things take time. And they don't always get reported. It's not always convenient. It's not always splashy. He talks about something in the book that he calls the negativity instinct. Bad stuff gets our attention, which makes sense because we've evolved to look for threats, right? We're trying to survive. We look for threats. Our attention is naturally drawn to the bad stuff. And when you add a little imagination to that, all sorts of crazy stuff can start to happen. But, you know, we're not living in a jungle with large predators and things like that anymore. And yet we still have that instinct in us. And you know, the media isn't some abstract entity. It's made up of people just like us with the same instincts. Plus, the media is in the business of trying to get our attention. So what happens? They give us what we're looking for. And there is indeed a negativity bias in our news coverage, but it hasn't always been that way. Actually, it's a fairly recent development. There's an interesting chart we're going to put up here. Researchers did a study of every single article that appeared in the New York Times from 1945 to 2015. And they tracked the words. They tracked the number of positive and negative words that appeared. So above the red line is a positive tone, below the red line is a negative tone. 1945 is over there on the left. You notice that everything is above the red line, positive tone to the news. And then sometime about the early 70s, it started to drop. And it's been dropping ever since down into, I guess, what we might call the negative zone. It went from mostly positive to mostly negative, and it seems to have stayed that way. And one of the conclusions, maybe slightly speculative, but one of the things that they consider is that Watergate and Vietnam made us suspicious and cynical about our leaders because of the spectacular lies and cover-ups that were revealed in the late 60s about the war, and of course the early 70s with the Watergate scandal. There's a movie out there called The Post. If you haven't seen it yet, it's a great refresher course on the kind of stuff that was going on back then, in case we may have forgotten. Maybe we like to forget, but it happened, and that's the result. Now, we're probably not going to change the way the news is covered so easily. One of the things we could do, I guess, is to literally cover it up like I did with the wrapping paper. It might seem a bit extreme, but I got a few hours of a great golf match with nothing to distract me. So do what you have to do. Ultimately, though, it's up to each of us to maintain a sense of perspective and to try to keep things in balance, which is why in our April newsletter, in the minister's article there, we gave you a list of resources that you can use to help to balance out the seeming barrage of bad news or the unpleasant news, to balance it out with some good news. In fact, I borrowed our title this morning, Reasons to be Cheerful, from one of those sites, which is called Reasons to be Cheerful, developed by David Byrne, who was best known from his days with the band Talking Heads. Sends out stories every week reporting on interesting, positive things that can give us a little bit of hope for the future. And some of these stories may seem to be a bit trivial. So what? You know, we can use it all. The seriously good, the trivial stuff that makes us smile and laugh a little bit. And there's plenty of good news that has some real substance. There have been stories on those sites about how New Zealand and Taiwan have been very successful in fighting this virus and how they went about it and what's happening there. Some people may be concerned about how voting might go this fall if restrictions are still in place. There's a story on Reasons to be Cheerful about how the state of Utah, they've been experimenting with new ways to make voting from home work better, and they work. Here's something from something called the Good News Network about how a village in Switzerland at the base of the Matterhorn projected the American flag onto the Matterhorn as a statement of solidarity. Now, it's probably hard for you folks to see on our camera, on our screen, so just know that I've taken all of this and put it on our website. Go to our website, unityofauburn.com, go to my blog, which is on the lower left side, and you've got the pictures and the quotes and everything. That's where our Sunday Bulletin handout is located now. But they projected the flag of the United States, sending a message of hope and strength to the United States of America. And of course, each night they do a different flag, but on this particular night it was our turn. That must have been one heck of a projector to put that up there. It's pretty amazing. But I checked it out. It's not photoshopped as far as I can tell. Pretty neat. I think maybe, probably CNN and NBC et al. Might have picked up on this kind of a story, but I found it on the Good News Network. That's where I located it. Now, in the category of perhaps a bit, I don't want to say frivolous, but on the lighter side, also on the Good News Network, there's a story about a woman in Florida who is a very talented sidewalk chalk artist. So she's been going around the neighborhood creating drawings like this one here. this first one here, and again, go to the blog on our website, you'll find a better version of it. But it's a picture of Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz standing under a rainbow, and the caption says, "There's no place like home. No, seriously, stay home." And then finally another one, and this one is actually my favorite. The next one here shows an octopus with a rather annoyed look on its face, and he's saying, "And you thought washing your hands was bad." You know, because what, they got like 8 of them that he'd have to wash, I guess. Yeah. And for the past month, Karen and I have been noticing something similar going on in our neighborhood. There's apparently been kids in our neighborhood who are going around writing out messages and drawings and flowers and all sorts of cool stuff on the street, on the sidewalks, about kindness and hope and love and things like that. And I understand Karen said it was a part of a school assignment of some kind, which is a great thing to do. You know, big things, little things, they all help us to maintain a healthy sense of perspective and balance, which we need, because there's always going to be bad news. And of course, we don't want to stick our heads in the sand, and we don't want to cultivate that negativity bias that we have. So again, if you go to our website, www.unityofauburn.com, on the blog, I have the quotes and the notes and the graph and the pictures from today. And that's all for today. We want to thank you for watching, and we will see you again next week.